Here it is, the worst of 2022. Hey Booktube, it's Kim at middle of the book march, and today's video is one of the best of the year. It's the worst of 2022. Now, I'm going to say this. These books encompass the crappiest reading experiences I had last year. I'm not going to say that these are the worst books, because for somebody else, these books may have been wonderful. Some of these books, I'm pretty sure, are well written. They just really did not work for me, and some of these were just abysmal reads for me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do things a little differently this year. Typically, my end of the year wrap-ups for books are kind of like top 10s or bottom 10s, and I'm not going to do that this year. I'm going to have shorter lists, because what I found I was doing was I was trying to find 10 books to put on all of the lists. And it wasn't hard to find the 10 worst books. It wasn't hard to find the 10 best books. But I wasn't really enthusiastic about all 10 of the best books. And I have a smaller group of books that I believed, for me, were exceptional. As far as the worst books, I think I read and finished 4 books that I rated 1 star, maybe even 3, and then I had a couple of 2-star books. So it's not like worst of the worst or bottom of the barrel, but I didn't want to include all of those to be the worst, so I have a shorter list. And what I also did was I want to tell you about the DNFs. And so this video is going to be my worst reads of the year and a couple of DNF categories that you'll see. So I'm going to start with the DNFs. What I did was I found books that were, for me, some of the saddest DNFs and a couple that were the most enthusiastic. So the 2 books that I felt were the saddest DNFs for me, the first one is The Books of Jacob by Olga Tokarczuk, translated from the Polish by Jennifer Croft. I started reading it and I got about a quarter of the way through this gigantic book. And I just decided to DNF it. It's a very complex, complicated story and an enormous amount of research, an enormous amount of historical fact combined with fictionalized characterization, an enormous amount of names that were very difficult to remember, a lot of magical realism, in a very long book. And I honestly just did not have it in me to continue to read it. I may pick it back up again someday. I do have the e-copy. The physical copy was so heavy in hardcover and so long, I think that may have contributed to my dislike of the experience. So that was one of my saddest DNFs for the year. The other one, I have 2. The other one is Yale Needs Women by Anne Gardner Perkins. I so wanted to read this book and finish it and love it, and I read a little over half of it, and I put it down because it was repetitive, and it was a very long list of names, both male and female, and how Yale went from being male only to a co-ed institution. And this all started in 1968. It was very repetitive in that it consistently said how the women were treated, the amount of sexism, the amount of harassment, and that it's kind of understood. I knew that was going to be the case. I knew there were going to be specific women that would be named in the book, and their accomplishments would have been heralded. I understood all that, but it continued to be that. And it said the same thing over and over again. So it just didn't work for me. I absolutely loved the topic of the book. It was nonfiction. It's just I wanted it to flow better, and it just didn't work. And then I have 2 books that are the most enthusiastic DNFs. The first one I don't think anybody's going to be surprised about. It is Out by Netsuo Kirino, translated from Japanese by Stephen Snyder. This was a buddy read with Britta, and she finished it. I kept voxering her, saying, I don't know how you're finishing it. But she finished it, and I read the summary of the book, and I got her to tell me the details, and I was very happy to DNF it. This was an awful book, talking about domestic violence, and one of the characters out of a friend group of 4 Japanese women who all work in a factory kills her husband right in the beginning of the book. And the other 3 friends help her in disposing of the body and covering up the crime. But it was gruesome, but that wasn't even the worst part of the book. The worst part was women falling in love with their rapists and rape being glorified, and the women having so much self-hatred and so much built-in misogyny of their own gender that the way they were talking about themselves and women in general was completely unacceptable to me. And I was very happy to DNF that book. The other most enthusiastic DNF was Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry, his memoir that recently came out. I've always been a Friends fan and watched the series a couple of times, used to watch it on repeat. It was very clear for anybody who watched the show of watching his physical transformation, knowing that he was either using alcohol or drugs, and just, listening to the way he was speaking and the weight loss and the weight gain, it was clear. But in this book, I was interested to find out his story, but he was so self-centered and so unwilling or unable to take accountability for the things that he did that he should be taking accountability for. It was very much a self-pitying celebrity memoir, and feel sorry for me because of my bad childhood, and feel sorry for me because of what happened. It was one thing after another like that. And I just didn't care. And the egotism and the minimization of women in his life, and just wanting all of the magnifying glass on him. And it was a lot of, this is what happened in my childhood, and this is why I always want so much attention. This is why I became a comedian, because I didn't get all the attention I needed in my childhood. And I didn't care. And to put a title like Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, we all know that the big terrible thing is your drug addiction. So don't try to gloss it over and make it sound like a clever title. Own it and own up to it right from the beginning. So I was really frustrated by that. And let's see, those are the DNFs. Let me tell you about the worst books of my year. One of the most disappointing was Death Comes to Pemberly by P.D. James. I buddy read this with Brian from Bookish. We both finished it, and I couldn't stand it. It was awful. It was, I believe, her last novel, and it was kind of supposed to be her love story to Pride and Prejudice, but it was a horribly constructed mystery. The characters were not used the way they should have been. The mystery was surrounded by tertiary or like sideline characters from Pride and Prejudice. It wasn't interesting for me for her to do that. And she completely overlooked the strength of Elizabeth Darcy. She completely overlooked her charm and her intelligence, and didn't use her in the main plot of the story. She was primarily used as a romantic lead to Mr. Darcy, and talking about getting pregnant at the end of the book. And I don't care if I just spoiled it. It was a poorly written book, poorly paced and plot driven. The murder mystery was unsolvable, and something you need to be able to say, oh yeah, even if you end up not knowing who done it by the end, you have to be able to go back and say, oh, I saw that clue and I should have noticed that. That wasn't like this in this book. You wouldn't have been able to do that. And so it's an incredibly disappointing mystery. One of the next worst books I've ever read is The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window and Disappeared by Jonas Jonasson, translated from Swedish by Rod Bradbury. Oh, this book sucked. And this was like the Swedish elderly Forrest Gump, and I think it's been described that way. I don't care. I don't want to read that book. And it was actually a book choice for my In Real Life book club, and I couldn't stand it. I read half of it, listened to it on audio, and then hate read quickly the last half. It was awful. It was stupid. It was misogynistic. It was all over the place, completely unrealistic, not even charming unrealistic. It wasn't funny. And I think, was there something lost in translation? Was there a humor that an American audience would have difficulty catching on to? It was just stupid and comical in a stupid way. Kind of almost like middle school humor and slapstick humor, and not clever. You know, a 100-year-old man who climbs out the window and escapes from his care facility. And all of a sudden it goes back and forth in time. He meets all these world leaders in his lifetime, but he's 100 years old, so nobody cares about his glorious past. And it's crazy. The things that happen with Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin and Chinese dictators, it was just stupid. So yeah, I really hated that experience. The next one is an novel by Mine Mizumura, translated from Japanese by Juliet Winters Carpenter. Literally a totally forgettable book for me. This is the story of a Japanese family, young Japanese woman who can't stand living in the U.S. and wants to go back to Japan, but her parents are elderly and ill, and she has a fly-by-night flaky sister, and the sister is pressuring her to stay and help take care of the parents when all she wants to do is leave and go back to Japan. But this book, the entire novel happens in a 24-hour period. Forgettable, boring, bored out of my mind, bored to tears as I was reading it. And I was reading it actually for the Booktube Prize in Translated Fiction last year, and I just thought this was a really disappointing experience. I couldn't stand it. And the last one, my most recent horrible read was Wholly the Firm by Annie Dillard. I read this for Shorty September because it's a little tiny thing, little tiny book. And I said before in my review/rant, she had to have been high when she wrote this book. And I should have been when I read the book. It was craziness. It was obtuse and didn't make any sense whatsoever. It was lofty and snobbish and what's the word I'm looking for? Not ill-gotten, but I'm not even going to use the word ill. It was just sick. It was a sick book. She adds portions in there that to me were not expected, but gory detail of a plane accident in this very short book. And it just was a mess. It was a hot mess, drug-induced piece of writing that was just awful. Absolutely awful. So that's it for me. Those are the few books that I felt were the worst reads for me for the year. A few books that I DNF'd that were notable DNFs for the reasons I talked about. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know what your books were for the year, if you have a worst book, or if there's a few books that really stand out to you that you can't believe you actually finished, and if you DNF some really good DNFs. So let me know about those in the comments below. My next video coming is the best of the year last year. And again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do a combination of the best and the best 4-star books, and the lists are going to be shorter. So come back for that later this week, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.